He was 19, and he had aged out of foster care with $1 he was about to spend, and a duffel bag that did not close all the way. He spent the dollar on a corner of a falling-down boat shed in Brooklyn, Maine, a town of 800 people on a saltwater reach where the tide ran 4 feet twice a day. The roof leaked. The floor had soft boards. The man who handed him the key said the corner had been dead space for nearly 50 years, and he could have it if he worked 6 months in the shop for nothing. But what nobody knew was that in the back of that corner, under a roll of sailcloth that had not been moved since the year men first walked on the moon, were 3 rolls of drawings, signed in pencil by a man who had learned his trade from one of the last living hands that had built for Harrishoff, and a letter, folded inside the largest roll, addressed in a careful, slanting script to whoever clears this corner. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. His name was Theo Marsh, and the records on the first part of his life are thin, which is true of most people who grow up the way he did. He was born in Bangor. His mother was 20 when she had him and not equipped for it, and that is the kindest and most accurate way to put it. There was no father on the certificate. He went into the system at 4, came back to her at 6, went back into the system at 7, and after that, he stopped going back. He lived in 6 placements between the ages of 7 and 18. Some were fine, some were not. He learned early not to unpack a bag all the way, and the habit stayed with him long after there was any reason for it. What saved him, if a thing like that can be named, was a man named Roy Tibbets. Roy ran a foster home outside Orono with his wife for 30 years. And Roy had been a boat builder before his knees went. And in the garage behind the house, Roy kept a half-finished peapod he never quite got back to, and a wall of tools hung on pegboard, each one outlined in marker so you knew where it went. Theo was placed with the Tibbets family at 15. He stayed 3 years, which was longer than he had stayed anywhere. And in those 3 years, in the garage, on the evenings when the house was loud and he needed to not be in it, Roy taught him things. Not in a planned way. Roy was not a man who made speeches. He would be working, and Theo would drift out and stand there. And after a while, Roy would hand him a block plane and say, "Try it." And that was the lesson. Theo learned what a fair curve was, which is a curve with no flat spots and no bumps in it. A curve your eye accepts before your mind can explain why. He learned that you do not sand a problem away. You find the high spot and take it down. He learned to mix marine epoxy, 2 parts resin to 1 part hardener by pump, and to thicken it with wood flour for a fillet, or with silica for a structural bond. He learned that a boat is not built exactly. It is fared. You bring it slowly toward the shape that was always supposed to be there, and you stop when there is nothing left to take away. Roy said, "The wood knows." Theo did not know if that was true, but he liked it. And he found that if he worked as though it were true, the work came out better. He learned the names. Shear, the line of the deck edge seen from the side, the most important line on a boat because it is the one the eye reads first. Stem, the timber at the bow. Transom, the flat board across the stern. Garboard, the plank next to the keel, the one that gives the most trouble. He learned that planks are not bent so much as persuaded, with steam and time and clamps, and that a plank persuaded too fast will check and split, and you will have wasted a board that took a tree 40 years to grow. He learned to be patient with materials, because materials do not care how much of a hurry you are in. They take the time they take. Roy had a way of saying it. The work goes at the speed of the work. You can ruin it by rushing. You cannot improve it. Roy died in the spring of the year Theo turned 18. It was sudden, a stroke, in the garage, with the radio on. Theo was the one who found him. The Peapod was still on the strongback, where it had been for a decade, half-planked, waiting for a man who was not coming back to it. The state has rules about these things. Theo was 18 by then, which in the language of the system meant he was an adult, which meant the placement ended with the death the way a lease ends, cleanly and on paper, regardless of what was true underneath the paper. Roy's wife wanted him to stay. The state did not, and there was no money, and grief makes some arrangements impossible to hold together. Theo packed his bag, which still did not close all the way, and he left. And for almost a year after that, he was 19, and adrift, in a way that does not photograph well and does not make a good story until later, if it makes one at all. He worked. He was not lazy, and he was not a drinker, and he was not looking for trouble. He worked in a warehouse in Bangor, stacking pallets, and he worked a season at a sporting goods store, and he slept in a rented room in a house with 4 other men who did not know each other, and he sent a little money to nobody because there was nobody to send it to, and he saved a little, not much, in a way that had no plan attached to it, because he had never been allowed to make a plan that lasted longer than a placement. He thought about the garage more than he expected to. He would be stacking a pallet, and his hands would remember the weight of a plane, the particular resistance of a curl of cedar coming up clean, and he would feel the absence of it like a missing tooth his tongue kept finding. Roy's wife wrote him a letter in the autumn. She was selling the house and moving to her sister's in Bangor, and the tools were going, and before they went, she wanted Theo to have one thing. It was Roy's lofting batten, a long, thin strip of clear spruce, 8 feet of it, with no knots, used for drawing the long, fair curves of a hull, full size, on the floor. She also wrote one more thing. She wrote that Roy had a friend in Brooklyn, down on the coast, a man named Hollis Crane, who built wooden boats the old way, and that Roy had said more than once that if Theo ever wanted to learn the trade for real, not as a hobby, but as a life, Hollis was the man, and Brooklyn was the place. She wrote the name and the town on a separate line, the way you write down something you want someone to be able to find again. Theo kept the letter for 2 months. He took it out and read it and put it back. There is a kind of door that stays a door only as long as you do not try it, and a part of him wanted to keep it a door. But the warehouse job ended after Christmas, when the season did, and he was 19, and one cold, flat morning in January, he counted what he had, which was a little under $300, and he put it in his pocket, and he put Roy's batten in a length of PVC pipe so it would not break, and he got on a bus. The coast of Maine in winter is not the coast of Maine that people photograph. The drive down the Blue Hill Peninsula took him past frozen blueberry barrens and granite ledge and spruce so dark it looked black against the snow. And then the land narrowed, and the water appeared on both sides, grey and moving and edged with ice where it met the shore. And Theo watched it, the way Roy had taught him to watch water, not for beauty, but for information. the set of the chop, the direction of the wind written on the surface. He got off at the general store in Brooklyn because that was where the bus stopped, and he asked the woman at the register where he might find Hollis Crane. And she looked at him for a moment, at the duffel and the PVC pipe, and she told him, without being asked, anything else. Down toward the Reach, the shop with the green doors. You'll smell the wood stove before you see it. He walked the last mile. Eggemoggin Reach lay flat and pewter-coloured at the bottom of the road, and across it, the long, low shape of an island, and the air had the specific cold cleanness of salt water in January, which is different from the cold of inland, sharper and somehow kinder. The shop had green doors, both of them shut against the weather, and a metal stovepipe with a thread of smoke standing straight up in the still air. And Theo stood in front of it for a minute, the way you stand in front of a thing you have come a long way to find and are suddenly afraid to ruin by going inside. He went inside. The shop was warm, and it was full of the smell of cedar shavings and pine tar and wood smoke, and a man was bent over a workbench under a row of windows that faced the water, planing the edge of a long board with a wooden jointer plane, and the sound of it filled the room, that clean, shearing whisper that Theo had not heard since the garage, and his chest did a thing he was not prepared for. The man was old, late 70s, maybe more, with a white beard cut close and forearms like a much younger man, which is what a lifetime of handwork does. It keeps the hands and arms long after it gives up everything else. He did not stop planing when Theo came in. He finished the stroke, checked the edge with his thumb, set the plane down on its side the way you set down a plane you respect, and only then looked up. "Help you," he said. It was not quite a question. "I'm looking for Hollis Crane. You found about half of him. The other half's in the back, arguing with a steam box." The old man straightened slowly, a hand at the small of his back. He looked at the PVC pipe under Theo's arm with more interest than he had looked at Theo. "What's in the tube?" "A batten, lofting batten. 8-foot spruce, clear." Something moved in the old man's face. Whose was it? "Roy Tibbetts. He passed. His wife sent it to me. She said to find you." Theo had not planned to say the rest, but it came out anyway, plainly, the way true things sometimes do when you are tired and far from home. "She said Roy said you were the man, and this was the place, if I wanted to learn it for real." Hollis Crane was quiet for what felt like a long time. Outside, the Reach moved under the grey light, and the stove ticked, and somewhere in the back, a hiss of steam rose and fell. "Roy Tibbetts," he said finally, as if setting a name down carefully on a shelf. "I built a Haven 12.5 with that man in 1971. Or it might have been 72. We argued about the rabbit line for 3 days. He came around the bench, and he did not offer his hand, which Theo would later understand was not rudeness, but a kind of respect, the withholding of an easy gesture from a thing that was going to require more than a gesture. You know what a rabbit is? The notch cut into the keel and stem where the plank lands. So it sits flush. You know how to cut one? No. I know what it is. I never cut one. That's the right answer, Hollis said. A man who tells me he can cut a rabbit he's never cut, I send him home. He looked at Theo a while longer, at the duffel that did not close, at the cold, reddened hands, at the way the boy stood, which was the way Roy had stood, balanced and quiet, and waiting to be useful. "I can't pay you," Hollis said. "I'll be honest about that up front. The shop barely pays me. I got 2 boats to finish before the ice goes out, and one of them's behind. What I've got is work, and a stove, and a corner you can sleep in if you don't mind the leak. There's a town here that takes its time about people, but it's a real place, and the trade's a real trade. That's the whole offer. You want it? It's $1. $1 for the corner. So it's yours and not borrowed. A man works better in a place that's his, even if his is $1 worth of a leaking shed." Hollis almost smiled. 6 months. You work the 6 months for nothing but the stove and the corner. And at the end of it, if you're any good, we'll talk about the part where I pay you. If you're not any good, you'll have learned that too, and it'll have cost you $1, which is cheap. Theo took out his money. He counted $1 onto the bench, a single, worn bill, next to the jointer plane. Hollis looked at it and nodded slowly, the way a man nods when something is settled that did not need words to settle it. And he picked up the bill and put it in his shirt pocket and buttoned the pocket. "Corner's in the back," he said. "Past the steam box. Don't let Earl scare you. He's deaf in one ear and meaner than he is, which isn't very." Earl, it turned out, was the other half of the shop, a man in his 60s with a limp and a cigarette he never lit, who was wrestling a steamed oak frame into a hull in the back bay, and who looked at Theo once, grunted, and said nothing, which Hollis later told him was a warm welcome by Earl's standards. The corner was exactly what had been promised, which is to say, it was almost nothing. A space maybe 10 feet by 12 at the back of the shed, separated from the working bay by a wall of vertical boards gone grey with age. The roof did leak. There was a stain on the floor in the shape of a continent, and a galvanized bucket set under the worst of it, half full of old rainwater with a skin of dust on top. There was a window with one cracked pane facing the reach. There was a workbench, ancient, its top scarred and oil-dark, and worn into a shallow dish where generations of hands had pressed down on it. There was a wood stove of his own, small, with a length of stovepipe going up through the roof. And there was, against the back wall, under the window, a long, low pile of something covered with a heavy canvas tarp, sailcloth gone stiff and brown, tied at the ends with tarred line, with the particular look of a thing that has not been touched in so long that touching it feels like waking something. Theo set his duffel on the bench. He set the PVC pipe with Roy's baton in the corner. He fed 3 sticks into the cold stove and got it going, and he stood with his hands out to it while the chill came off the iron, and he listened to the sounds of the shop through the board wall, the plane, the hiss of steam, Earl's occasional low cursing, the water moving against the shore outside. For the first time in a year, longer than a year, he was somewhere he did not want to leave. He did not have a word for the feeling, and he did not try to find one. He just stood there and let it be true. That night he could not sleep. The stove ticked as it cooled, and the wind came up off the reach and worked at the cracked pane. And Theo lay in his sleeping bag on the dished workbench because the floor was wet, and he looked at the dark shape of the sailcloth pile against the lighter dark of the window, and he thought about Roy, and he thought about the garage and the half-planked peapod no one would ever finish now. And at some point past midnight, he could not stand, not knowing any longer. He got up. He lit the lamp. He knelt by the pile and untied the tarred line at one end. The knots stiff and reluctant, the line shedding tar dust onto his fingers, and he peeled back the sailcloth, and the lamplight fell on what was underneath, and Theo Marsh went very still. For a while he did nothing at all. That is the part people leave out of these stories, the long, flat minutes where nothing happens because the person is simply looking, letting the eyes do their slow work before the hands are allowed to start. He knelt there on the wet floor in the lamplight, with the wind at the cracked pane, and he looked. And what he was looking at, when his mind finally caught up to his eyes, was lumber. Not treasure. Lumber. But lumber, the way a starving man looks at bread, is still the most beautiful thing in the room. Stacked against the back wall, kept up off the floor on two sawhorse rails so the damp would not get into it, was a small fortune of old-growth boat-building stock. He did not know it was a fortune yet. He knew it was good wood, the way you know a person is kind before you can say how. There were planks of cedar, clear and wide, the kind of width that does not come off trees anymore because the trees that grow that wide are not allowed to grow that long. There were lengths of white oak, quarter sawn, the grain running dead straight, oak for frames and floors and the parts that take the load. There was a stick of Sitka spruce, light as balsa for its strength, the wood you make spars from, and you do not find it lying around. And rolled and standing in the corner behind the wood, wrapped in their own oilcloth, were the 3 rolls of drawings. He left the wood. He took the rolls. He brought them to the bench and set the lamp close, and untied the first one with hands that were steadier than he expected, because the work, even the work of opening a thing, has a way of steadying a person who knows how to work. The first roll was lines, a boat's lines, drawn small, the 3 views a builder needs, the profile and the plan and the body plan, with its nested sections like the rings of a tree laid open. He could read enough of it to know it was a sailboat, maybe 26 feet, with a long, fine entry and a low, sweet sheer, the kind of curve Roy would have stood and looked at without saying anything, which from Roy was the highest praise there was. In the corner of the sheet, in pencil gone soft and silver with age, was a name and a date. The name he could not place. The date was the year before he was born. The second roll was the construction drawing, the same boat shown from the inside, every frame and floor and fastening called out. The scantlings written in a column down the margin in a small, slanting hand. He understood about half of it. The other half, he understood the way you understand a language you are going to learn, as a promise rather than a possession. The third roll was different. It was larger, and the paper was heavier, and when he unrolled it, a folded letter fell out onto the bench, and he set it aside without opening it, because some part of him knew the letter would change the wood from a fortune into something he had a duty toward, and he was not ready for the duty yet. He wanted 1 more minute of it just being good wood and good drawings. So he looked at the third roll first, and the third roll stopped his breath in a different way than the wood had. It was a full-size pattern, a loft drawing, traced off in places, with baton-sprung curves laid down in pencil and then gone over in ink, and notes in the margins in that same slanting hand. Half-breadths, diagonals. A note that said, "This curve fared by eye, 4 times, 3rd time best." And across the bottom, underlined twice, a line that Theo read 3 times before it went all the way into him. Hull lofted full and fared, frames cut, backbone assembled, did not get to plank her. The man behind me will know what to do. He sat down on the bench because his legs wanted him to. Then he picked up the letter and he opened it. It was 2 pages, written on both sides in pencil, the hand careful and old and slanting uphill, the way some old hands do. There was no waste in it. I have stood in that shed enough mornings to tell you the letter reads exactly the way the man planed aboard. No flourish, every stroke doing a job. To whoever clears this corner, my name is Asa Pruitt. I was born in this town in 1931, and I have built boats in this shed since I came back from Korea in 1953. I learned the trade from an old builder named Sargent, who always said he had learned it in turn from a man who set up frames down at the Harrishoff yard in Bristol before the First War. And whether that last part is exactly so, I never could say. But the way I do things goes back further than me either way, and I am only a link in it. And now, you are the next link, if you want to be. I do not know who you are. I am writing this in the fall of 1979 because my hands are starting to argue with me, and a man should put his affairs in order before the arguing turns into a quarrel he loses. The wood is good. I bought most of it in 1961 and 1962 from the Sargent estate, and it has been kept dry, and it is better than anything you can buy now. Use it on something worth using it on. The drawings are a boat I designed myself over many years, a small cruising sloop, easy on her helm, able in a chop, the kind of boat one person can sail alone and sleep aboard. I lofted her full size on this floor. I cut the frames, and I set up the backbone. I did not plank her. I will tell you why, because you will wonder, and a man should not have to wonder about a thing left to him. I built her for my son. His name was Daniel. He went out across the bar at the mouth of the river in October of 1968 to help bring in a boat that had lost its engine in weather, which is the kind of thing the men here do for each other without being asked. And the boat he went out in did not come back. He was 20. I had laid the keel for his boat that summer. After we lost him, I could not bring myself to plank her, and I could not bring myself to burn her either. And so she has stood on the strongback, under canvas, for 11 years now, and I have worked around her every day. And some days I have talked to her, which I am only telling you because you should know what kind of man left you this, so you can decide whether to honor it or not. I am asking you to finish her. I know that is a large thing to ask of a stranger, but a boat that is lofted and framed and never planked is the saddest thing in a shed. And Daniel was not the kind of boy who would want a sad thing standing in his name. Finish her right, the way the drawings say and the way the wood wants, and put her in the water, and let somebody sail her. It does not have to be you. It only has to be somebody. If you cannot, then give the wood and the drawings to someone who can. And do not feel bad about it. A man can only carry what he can carry. But if you can, then she is yours, and Daniel's, and mine. And that is 3 of us behind you now, which is not a bad number to have at your back when you take up a hard thing. Asa Pruitt, November 1979. Theo read it twice, the way he had read Roy's wife's letter twice, the way it turns out a person reads anything that is going to change the shape of his days. He did not cry, though his throat was tight and his eyes stung in the cold. He folded the letter along its old creases, and he put it back in the 3rd roll, and he sat in the lamplight for a long time, with the wind working at the window. And then he covered the wood and the rolls back up with the sailcloth gently, the way you pull a blanket up over a sleeping person. And he lay down on the bench in his sleeping bag. And he did not sleep, but it was a different kind of not sleeping than before. In the morning, he asked Hollis. He waited until they had been working 2 hours, because he had learned from Roy that you do not bring a serious question into a cold shop first thing. You let the stove warm the room, and the work warm the hands. And you ask when the asking will not stop anything. He was holding a frame for Hollis while the old man fitted it, and he said, not looking up, "There's wood in my corner, under the canvas, and drawings, signed Asa Pruitt." Hollis did not stop fitting the frame. But something in the shop got quieter, the way a room gets quieter when a name is said that has weight in it. "I know what's under that canvas," Hollis said. "I helped him cover it." He tapped the frame home and stood back and looked at it. And then he looked at Theo, and Theo understood that the old man had been waiting to see whether he would find it, and whether he would say so, and that saying so had been a test he had not known he was taking. "You knew him." "All my life. Asa Pruitt was the best builder on this reach and the most private man in this town, which on this reach is a hard double to pull off." Hollis pulled a stool over with his foot and sat, which he did not often do in working hours, and that told Theo this was going to be a thing said properly. "He built that shed corner up when I was a boy. I learned half of what I know watching him through that board wall before he'd let me in the bay. He was Korea, came back quiet, married a girl from Sedgwick, had the one boy, Daniel." Hollis was silent a moment. "You read the letter?" "Yes." "Then you know about Daniel." Hollis looked out the window at the reach, grey and moving. "I was on the dock the morning they realized that boat wasn't coming back. October of '68. There's a kind of weather we get here in the fall, comes up fast out of the northeast, and a boat with a dead engine in it is just a thing the sea is allowed to keep. Daniel went out with 2 other men to put a line on a vessel that had lost power off the river mouth. And they got the line on, and they got the other boat in. And Daniel went over in the chop doing it. And the water in October here will stop a young heart in 15 minutes. And they did not get to him in time. He said it plainly, the way the letter was written, because some griefs are too large to dress up, and dressing them up only makes them smaller and meaner than they are. Asa never said his boy's name again that I heard. He worked harder than ever, which is what men of his make do with a thing they cannot set down. He just worked around that boat under the canvas for the rest of his life. And he died in 1981, 2 years after he wrote that letter, in this shop, in the afternoon. And I was the one found him, the way you found Roy." The 2 of them sat with that for a moment, the strange and ordinary fact that the trade was a chain of men finding each other at the ends of things and handing the work forward across the gap. "What happened to the boat?" Theo said. "After. Nothing happened to it. That's the whole trouble. Asa's wife passed not long after he did. No other family. The shed got bought and sold a couple times for the bay you and I work in, and that corner just got walled off and forgot. I told 2 or 3 young fellows over the years it was back there. None of them was the right one. They saw old wood and a sad story, and they wanted no part of it." Hollis stood, his knees, telling the room about it, and he picked his chisel back up. Asa wrote that the man behind him would know what to do. I've waited a long time to find out if he was right. He did not look at Theo when he said the next part, which was its own kind of kindness. "Take your time deciding." "It's a real thing," he asked. "It's not a small thing. A boy ought to know what he's saying yes to before he says it." That was the first week. The town came the way the woman at the store had implied it would, slowly and on its own schedule, by ones, and never empty-handed. A lobsterman named Dell, who fished out of the harbour and kept his traps stacked along the shore road, came by the third day with a paper sack of the previous night's bycatch, 2 flounder and a pound of mussels, and set it on the bench without much of a word, and stood looking at the sailcloth pile for a moment before he left. He had known Daniel, it turned out. Most of the older men had. A woman named Greta, who ran the library that was open Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday, walked out the Green Doors Road with a thermos and 2 mugs on a raw afternoon, and drank coffee with Hollis and Theo standing up. And on her way out, she looked at Theo with frank assessment and said the Historical Society had been trying for years to get someone to catalogue Asa Pruitt's drawings before they rotted, and that if the boy ever wanted to make a little money, there was a stipend in it, small but real. And she left her card, which was a paper card, because Greta was not a person who did things on a screen. And there was a man named Pelletier, 80 if he was a day, who had run the boatyard ferry in his working years and had ridden with Asa on the dock the morning of October 68, who came down one Sunday and stood in the corner and put one hand flat on the sailcloth and stood there with his hat off. An old man with his hat off in a cold, leaking shed, and said nothing at all, and then put his hat back on and nodded at Theo once, and went home. Theo did not know yet how the town would take him in, but he understood, watching Pelletier walk slow back up the road, that he had not inherited a corner and some wood. He had walked into the middle of something the whole Reach had been carrying for 50 years, and quietly waiting to set down. He decided on a Thursday. There was no lightning to it. He had spent 2 weeks learning the shop, cutting his first rabbit under Hollis's eye on a piece of scrap until the old man grunted, which was Earl-level praise, and from Hollis meant a great deal, and fairing frames, and sweeping the floor, which a builder does more than anything, and through all of it, the sailcloth pile sat in his corner like a question. On the Thursday, Hollis was out at the post office, and Earl was at the steam box, and the shop was quiet, and Theo went into his corner and pulled the sailcloth all the way off, folded it, and there she was. The backbone of Asa Pruitt's last boat, the keel and stem and sternpost and the cut frames standing up off it like the ribs of something that wanted very much to be alive, lofted and framed, and waiting 45 years for the next link in the chain to pick up the plank. Theo went and got Roy's batten out of the PVC pipe. He sprung it along the sheer of the standing frames the way Roy had taught him, sighting down it, checking the curve for fairness, for any flat spot or bump, any place the long line of her caught. He stood back, and he looked at her the way Roy had taught him to look at a thing, not for beauty, but for truth. She was fair. After 45 years under canvas, the curve Asa Pruitt had fared by eye 4 times, third time best, was still fair, still true, still waiting. "All right," Theo said, out loud, to the empty corner, to the frames, to 3 men standing at his back. "All right, I'll plank her." And then, because saying it out loud had made it real, and real things have a way of arriving with their own difficulties, he heard the first hard gust of the northeast wind hit the green doors, and Earl call out from the bay in a voice that did not curse for once. "Hollis ain't here, kid. Get the storm shutters. It's coming on to blow." And Theo looked out the cracked pane and saw the Reach going from pewter to black, under a sky lowering fast out of the northeast. The exact weather, the exact direction that the letter and the old men had told him about, coming down the Reach toward a shed full of 50 years of dry old-growth wood, and a boy who had just promised to finish a dead man's boat. The storm did not take the shed. That is the first thing to say, because a story that builds a roof full of dry, old-growth wood and then puts a northeaster on top of it owes you the truth quickly. Theo got the storm shutters up, heavy plank shutters that hooked over the windows of the working bay, working fast in the first cold spits of rain, with Earl shouting the sequence at him from inside. And then he went to his own corner, and there were no shutters for the cracked pane. So he took a sheet of the marine plywood, leaned against the bay wall, and he screwed it over the window from inside. 4 screws. And the leak in the roof he could do nothing about except move Asa Pruitt's wood and drawings to the dry side of the corner and stand the rolls upright on the bench where no water could reach them. The wind blew for 2 days. The Reach went white and then grey-green, and then the colour of nothing. And the rain came sideways, and the old shed groaned and held the way old things hold, having survived worse. And on the 3rd morning, it was over. The air washed clean and bitterly cold and still, and a skin of new ice stood in the bucket under the leak. The wood was dry, nothing was lost. Hollis came back from where he had waited the storm out at his house up the road, looked at the plywood screwed over Theo's window, and the wood moved to high ground, and said only, "You think like a builder. That's harder to teach than the rest of it." Which Theo would keep, the way he kept the few good things people had said to him in the place where he kept Roy's voice. Then began the long work, and it is the long work that this story is really about, because the finding of a thing is a moment, and the earning of it is a year. He planked her over the better part of 8 months. He did not rush it, because Asa's drawings did not allow rushing, and because Roy's voice would not allow it either. The work goes at the speed of the work. He started with the garboard, the plank next to the keel, which is the hardest plank on any boat because it twists hard at the ends and lands in the rabbit at a brutal angle, and he spiled it, which means he took a pattern off the actual gap with a spiling batten and a pencil, rather than trusting a measurement, because the boat, as she stands, is always a little different from the boat on paper, and the wood does not care what the paper says. He cut the cedar plank to the spiled shape, and he beveled its edge, and he steamed it in Earl's steam box until it went limp and obedient, and he hung it hot, clamping from the middle out, persuading it into the twist, while Hollis stood by and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the boy was not already doing. The plank took. The next morning he took the clamps off, and it had set into the shape of her, and it was fair. He did this 34 times to a side. Cedar over the white oak frames, each plank spiled and beveled and steamed and hung, fastened with silicon bronze screws, because bronze does not rot a boat from the inside the way steel does. The heads set below the surface, and the holes plugged with bungs of the same cedar, so the grain ran the same way, and the plug nearly disappeared. He faired the hull when the planking was done, the whole long sweep of her, with a longboard and then with finer paper, finding the high spots the way Roy had taught him and taking them down, bringing her slowly toward the shape that had always been supposed to be there. He sheathed her bottom in fiberglass cloth, set in epoxy, which Asa's 1979 drawings did not call for, because Asa had built her the traditional way, and the marine epoxies were only then coming into the small shops, and which Hollis approved with a single dry sentence that became one of Theo's favorite things anyone ever taught him. "Here is the thing people get backward about wooden boats," Hollis said. "They think the old way is always the right way. But a cedar hull, sheathed in epoxy and glass, will outlive a traditional plank-on-frame boat by 30 years, because the wood can't take up water and swell, and the seams can't work loose." And Asa Pruitt, who was the most traditional man on this reach, would have used it in a heartbeat, because Asa cared about the boat lasting, not about the boat being old-fashioned. A good builder uses the best of his own time. That's the tradition. The tools change. The eye doesn't. He built her interior out of the Sitka spruce and the better cedar, a single bunk to port and a small galley to starboard, a folding table, a place for a chart, and a place for a book, and not much else, because Asa had drawn her for one person to sail alone and sleep aboard, and Theo did not add to her or take from her. He stepped a mast he made himself from the spruce, 8-sided, then 16-sided, then round, planed down over many evenings by hand and lamplight. The same evening work Asa must have done in the same corner. He painted her topsides with 3 coats of marine enamel in a deep green, the green of the spruce across the reach in the last light, mixed for him by a man in Ellsworth who had been blending marine paint for 40 years, and who, when Theo described what he wanted, did not ask a single follow-up question, only nodded and went in the back and came out with it. He left her sheer, straight, bright, varnished, 8 coats, so the one fine line that the eye reads first would catch the light and show what she was. There is a thing about a wooden boat that Theo did not know until Hollis told him, and that almost no one outside the trade knows, and it is the kind of fact the older men on the reach tell a younger man with great seriousness, because getting it wrong has drowned boats. You cannot put a traditional wooden boat in the water and sail her. Not the first day. A boat that has been built in a dry shed has dry planks, and dry planks have shrunk, and there are gaps at the seams you could lay a coin in. And if you launch her and leave her, she will fill and go to the bottom in an afternoon. You have to let her take up. You float her on her lines, and you let the water swell the wood for a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, while she weeps at every seam, and you pump her twice a day, and slowly the planks swell and find each other, and the seams close, until one morning you check the bilge, and it is dry, and only then is she a boat. Theo's hull was sheathed below the waterline, so she would not weep the way an unsheathed boat does. But Hollis made him learn the old way anyway, the priming and the taking up, because he said, "You build for your own time, but you carry the whole chain. And a builder who doesn't know what his grandfathers had to know is a poorer builder for it, even when he never uses it." The town took him in over those same months, the way the older men had let him understand it would, by degrees, by work, without ceremony. He started fishing a few traps with Dell in the grey hours before the shop, not for money so much as for the company and the bycatch. And he learned the bottom of the harbour by where the traps came up full and where they came up empty. He took Greta's stipend and spent his Tuesday and Thursday evenings at the library cataloguing Asa Pruitt's drawings, smoothing the brittle sheets, reading the slanting hand, building an archive of a builder's whole working life that the Historical Society had wanted for years and that no one had been the right one to do. Pelletier came down to the shop more often as the planking rose and stood and said little, and one afternoon told Theo the whole of October 1968 in a low, even voice, the line they got on the dead boat and the line they could not get on Daniel, and then never spoke of it again, having handed it forward to the one person who was finally doing something with the weight of it. Hollis began, around the 6th month, to pay him. Not much. The shop barely paid Hollis, but it was wages, and it made Theo a builder and not a charity. And Hollis was careful to make that distinction out loud, because he knew what it meant to a boy who had been a charity his whole life. This kind of life is more available than people think, and it is worth saying plainly, because the whole point of a story like this is wasted if it stays a fairy tale. Brooklyn, Maine, has a population of around 800 people, and it is, improbably, one of the centers of wooden boat building in the world. The wooden boat school there has been teaching the trade to people who arrive knowing nothing since 1981, summer after summer, and the magazine that shares its name has been printed in that town since the 1970s. The Penobscot Marine Museum up the coast in Searsport has been keeping the record of this kind of work since 1936. The trade is not dead, and it is not even dying, though it is small, and it rewards exactly the thing a kid like Theo had and did not know was worth anything: patience, and an eye, and a willingness to do a hard thing slowly and correctly when no one is watching. There were, the year Theo arrived, more young people learning to build wooden boats on that one reach than there had been in decades. The work is real. The places are real. The door is a real door, and it is not locked. And most people simply never try it, because trying it means leaving the life that fits and means nothing. He came to the Reach in January, and he was still there the following January, and in between, the seasons came around once, the way the older men had taught him to watch for them. The ice went out of the cove behind the shed in late March, in a single still night, and Theo wrote the date down. He had started a notebook, not a copy of Asa's drawings and not a copy of Roy's lessons, but a continuation of them. The way the trade itself is one long continuation. He wrote down the ice dates and the day the alewives ran up the stream, and the morning the ospreys came back to the nest on the channel marker, and the first time he heard the white-throated sparrow, which the old men called the old Sam Peabody bird for the shape of its song. He wrote down the boats that came into the shop, and what was wrong with them, and how they were fixed. He wrote down the things Hollis said that were worth keeping, and there were many of them, because an old builder, near the end of his working life, gives away everything he knows to the right young pair of hands, all at once and without reservation, the way Asa had given his away in a letter to a stranger. The botanist did not come, because this was not that kind of story. Instead, it was the Historical Society, and then, after Greta sent a few photographs to the magazine in town, an editor who walked out the green doors road one June morning and looked at Asa Pruitt's last boat, standing planked and faired and nearly finished in the corner she had stood unfinished in for 45 years, and listened to the whole of it, the letter and Daniel and the chain of men, and asked quietly if he might write it down. Theo said the words would have to be true, and the editor said that was the only kind worth printing. The piece ran that fall. It did not make Theo famous, because that is not what happens, and it is not what he wanted. But people wrote to him, people who had a corner of a shed somewhere, or a half-finished boat from a father, or a trade they had let go of, or a door they had never tried. He answered the ones he could. He was not making a living from the writing, or the stipend, or the wages alone. Together, carefully managed, the way Asa had managed and Roy had managed, they were enough. They launched her in October. He chose the date himself, and he did not tell anyone why. But Hollis knew, and Pelletier knew. And when the day came, they did not say the reason out loud, which was the right way to do it. It was October, the month the Reach takes its toll, the month Daniel went across the bar and did not come back, 50-some years gone. And Theo put Asa Pruitt's boat in the water in that month on purpose, to turn the month from the one thing it had been on this Reach for 50 years into something it could also be, which was a beginning. They trucked her to the town landing and slung her in on the boatyard's old crane, and she settled onto her lines exactly where the drawings said she would float, which is the moment a builder lives for, the moment the paper and the wood and the water all agree. And a small crowd of the Reach stood on the landing in the cold, bright air and watched. Dell and Greta and Earl with his unlit cigarette, and old Pelletier with his hat already off before she touched the water. She did not weep, because of the glass and the epoxy, and she did not need 2 weeks to take up. But Theo left her at the float for 10 days anyway, and pumped a dry bilge every morning, because Hollis had taught him the old way, and because some part of him wanted to give her the full ceremony, the slow taking up, the patient waking. On the 11th morning, he sailed her out onto Eggemoggin Reach, alone, in a light northerly, with the green hull dark on the grey water and the bright sheer catching the low sun. And she was, as Asa had promised in the slanting hand 45 years before, easy on her helm and able in the chop, a boat one person could sail alone. And Theo sailed her down the Reach and back, and there was no one to see it but the ospreys and the seals, and 3 men standing at his back, who were not there and were entirely there. He named her Daniel. He had thought about it for months, and there was never really another name. He carved the name into the transom himself and gilded the letters, and he wrote to the address Asa's wife had once given the town for next of kin, in case there was anyone. And there was no one, the way there had been no one for the old man who saved his coins on a bayou, and no one for the woman on her lake, the way there is so often no one, which is the quiet engine under all of these stories, the way a thing one person built with great care passes not